We are now live. Sound check. Governance Review Subcommittee meeting for Friday, September 9th, 2022. Sound check.
Good morning, one and all. It is September the 9th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting of the Governance Review Subcommittee to order. To order, please. My name is Maureen Wilson. I will be your chair this morning. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website, that any presentations and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and that members of the public can certainly contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternate form. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function, and members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can certainly submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. Attending with me in the committee room, I'm joined by Councillor Clark. Good morning.
Good morning.
Attending virtually, Councillor Maria Pearson, Councillor Arlene Vanderbeek, and I note that Councillor Ferguson will be in attendance. He will just be later today, so thank you. Quorum is present. Elsie McCrae, on to the agenda. Are there any changes, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are changes. There's an added delegation request for item 10.4. It's Carl Andrus, Hamilton Community Benefits Network. This is delegation request item 6.2. Once again, respecting item 10.4, the 2022 review of the city's procedural bylaw, FCS 22075. We had 3 added delegation requests for item 10.1, which is report FCS 22072. This is 6.3, Kubra Hager, Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion. Unfortunately, they have withdrawn this morning, but we also have 6.4, Marlene Diamoa from the Committee Against Racism, and Lyndon M. George, Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, and he's item 6.5. We also have added consent item 7.1, which is the Code of Conduct and Conflict of Interest Education and Communications, which is HUR 22011 and CM 22018.
Thank you very much. It is moved by Councillor Vanderbeek and seconded by Councillor Pearson to approve the agenda as amended, please. Any discussion on that? Seeing none. Carries 4-0. Thank you. Any declarations of interest this morning from my committee members? Seeing none. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of June 23rd, 2023? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Maureen Wilson. Any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, an electronic vote, please. The vote is up. And that carries 4-0. There are no communications this morning. Delegation requests. Can we please have a mover and a seconder to approve all of them in one go for this morning? Yes, moved by Councillor Vanderbeek, seconded by Councillor Pearson. From 6.1 to 6.5, thank you. Carries 4-0, thank you. On to consent item 7.1, Code of Conduct and Conflict of Interest Education and Communications. A mover and a seconder to please place the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Clark. We have a member wishing to raise some discussion, so I will recognize Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. Is this working? Can you hear me? With regards to the Code of Conduct and the education process that is being undertaken for staff, have we addressed the issue of an employee of the City of Hamilton who is also owns a business and conducting business with the City of Hamilton?
Who will be speaking to that question? Ms. Fontana? I'm not familiar, I'm sorry. No.
There it goes.
And if you, members of staff who are participating, my apologies, if you could kindly introduce yourself at the beginning, I would appreciate it.
So good morning, Nancy Coca, Director of HR Systems and Operations. So through the chair to Councillor Clark, I know of one incident where we have addressed a circumstance where an employee has disclosed a business relationship, and prior to proceeding with any activity within the city, he and his manager discussed ways to mitigate the circumstances, and we were putting in place a plan in order to ensure that those perceived conflict of interests were addressed. And then we document that and we review it regularly.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge that I'm having is when I hear about these anecdotal issues, an employee with the City of Hamilton has relationships with many people and many managers. And so if they're actually conducting business with the City of Hamilton, there is a risk of preferential treatment just because of the relationships, because they know each other. I think it would be appropriate for the senior leadership team to look at that issue and set clear policy on it. It's bothered me for a number of years. I raised it in my previous term on council. My concerns were dismissed at that particular time, but it continues to pop up from time to time. And I'm just, we need to ensure above all that we are being held to the highest standard of integrity when there's business being conducted with the City of Hamilton. So if an employee owns a business and is also an employee, you can see the inherent, even though there may be no intention of impropriety, there is a perception of it. And so I don't know how we would address that, maybe just leave it with staff to deal with it in the coming term.
Thank you. Staff, would you care to respond? Thank you.
So through the chair, as you can see from part of the report that we've submitted, one of the things that we've acknowledged that needs to happen more consistently is to provide some ongoing communication throughout the year to staff and people leaders, so that when we start to see these sorts of trends or we start to see common cases come up, we have an opportunity to provide that clarity consistently with all employees so that they understand their obligations and that people leaders sort of know how to mitigate and manage those when they come forward. One of the other things that we recognized as well is that although some of those anecdotal stories that come up or some of the things that are being done at the department level and people leaders trying to do the right thing, documenting and ensuring we keep track of those disclosures is important so that we can follow up regularly and make sure that when circumstances change, we're affording employees and their people leaders the opportunity to make additional mitigation strategies in place, or when there is a conflict of interest, to identify and put things in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. So I think people have a sense of what's right to do, but we can do a better job around communicating and educating staff regularly throughout the year and pinpointing those common things such as conflict of interest. You know, when there's issues around gifts and hospitality, those are the things we're going to focus in on in terms of communication and training. And the training that we're offering is going to be online so that it's accessible to all staff, and there'll be a requirement that they participate in that training annually as part of their required training program.
Yeah, I guess I have higher hopes. In my mind, if you're working for the City of Hamilton, then you should not be conducting business with the City of Hamilton. From my perspective, it's that clear. So I would ask that staff review that and then report back to the new council. Thank you.
I recognize Ms. Fontana. If you could introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Through the chair.
Nope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Laura Fontana, Executive Director of Human Resources. Councillor Clark, we will take that away. I think there are some legal issues that we need to deal with in terms of our ability as an employer and what our rights are in terms of trying to control those potential conflicts of interest versus an employee's rights, owning their own business or whatever that may entail. I think we'll do some more investigative works, understand the legal implications, again, what our rights are versus the employee rights, and then come back to council with more detailed analysis and recommendations moving forward.
Councillor.
I appreciate that. And my perspective is if you want to work for the city of Hamilton, you don't do business with the city of Hamilton for your business. It should be that dry, because every time something like that pops up in the public, it erodes the trust with the municipality, it erodes our integrity, and we need to be very clear. So the policy, in my opinion, can't have wiggle room. You know, it's very clear. If you want to work with the city of Hamilton, you can't do business with the city of Hamilton. And so I'll just leave it at that. I think I've made my point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further commentators or questions? Councillor Vanderbeek, I think you're the vice chair. Could you assume the chair on my behalf? Thank you.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just for public consumption, the training that will be done and available online, just confirming that that is mandatory, that they participate and that there is a record that they have participated?
Through the chair. So yes, that is correct. Our ability to be able to track people's completion and be able to tie it to their annual requirement to sign off on the code of conduct will all be connected through that online training.
Okay, thank you. And further to my colleagues' questions about doing business with the City of Hamilton, if you are an employee of the City of Hamilton, I don't mean to be poke the bear, but if, for example, I owned a quilting company privately, could I work in the quilting section of the city, and then could I bid on a quilting contract? Through the chair.
And who can answer that?
So through the chair, I don't see any issue with working in the quilting department if you have a quilting business. I think the issue now is whether or not you can bid on work if you have a quilting company. And I think that's a suggestion in terms of doing a bit more further legal analysis, particularly as to whether or not we can prevent an employee from bidding on a contract, being a city employee, and then having a business that is involved with our businesses. I think that's the legal question that we have to answer in terms of what our rights and obligations are versus an employee's rights and obligations, and that's what we're going to come back with.
Councillor?
Thank you to staff. I'm very much looking forward to that report coming back and the analysis and the parameters. Thank you very much, Councillor Vanderbeek. I will assume the chair.
I'll pass it back.
Thank you. Elsie McCrae, did we have a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor? My apologies.
We did. I just wasn't sure. Does Councillor Clark wish to put that in a formalized motion, or were you just giving some direction to staff?
I think, I'm sorry, not used to this. I think it's probably appropriate to put it in the form of a motion so that we can track it, because I tried it once before, a long time ago, and it didn't get tracked. So if I could just simply move an amendment to this that we ask staff to review and set a policy with regards to employees of the City of Hamilton doing business with the City of Hamilton. I think that would be the most succinct way of describing it. Madam Clerk?
So through the chair, I have something similar. I said that staff be directed to review the city's policies around city employees who are also business owners bidding on city contracts and report back to the governance review subcommittee in the new term of council.
Well, that makes me look smart, so I'll accept that.
Okay. And just procedurally, you could put that forward as a motion, and then we would just still receive the, it's just a consent item, it's just an information report, so we could just receive the information report, and this could be just a motion that you put on the floor as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we just need a seconder for your motion.
I'll second the motion. Thank you. So we'll put that motion up first and then, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The motion, the vote on the motion is before you. Thank you. That carries 4-0. And receipt of the report has been duly moved and seconded. And that vote is up. Thank you, members. 4-0. On to public hearings and delegations. We will now hear from the delegates who have registered to speak on item 10.4. A reminder to delegates that you have 5 minutes. 9.1 is Mr. Cameron Kretsch in person here joining us, I think for the first time in a long time in person. So to the members who are viewing this online, we're just setting up the laptop so that the presentation can be seen. So just give us a minute or two. Good morning, Cameron.
Morning, and thank you. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been here in person. Glad to be here, though. It's my probably 5th or 6th time delegating on this issue in the last 5 years, so hoping some of these changes make it through this time. Speaking to you today about the procedural bylaw. I want to give you 2 issues, I think, that are huge issues that should be addressed. As you know, I've submitted for years lots of long, detailed comments. This time around, I'm just trying to focus on 2 things. One, I think that members of council aren't using their time at standing committee meetings as efficiently as possible. And 2, I think the bylaw is just too long, difficult to understand, and far too challenging to apply. Solution, restructure council standing committee meeting commitments. I know this is not a mild ask, and I realize it would take time, but I think it's important. Number 2, rewriting the procedural bylaw to improve clarity, accessibility, and usability. Why listen to me about this? Well, I've been coming to talk to you about this for a long time. You've taken my recommendations in the past, which I appreciate, quite a number of them. And also, I have experience around clear writing principles, around literature, around reading, around literacy, decades worth at this point. So I'm coming to you with that experience. So number 1, changes to the meeting schedule. Right now, this is what's going on, right? So there are these 5 committees is where I'm talking about. The 4 on the right are standing committees of council, and you can see with the fractions I've used for audit, finance, administration, currently 8 councillors sit there. Purchasing and community services, 6, planning, 8, and public works, 11. So you have sort of a range of 40 to 70% of council on each standing committee, and then all members at GIC. What I'm suggesting is getting rid of GIC and having everybody attend all 4 of the standing committee meetings. There's a bunch of reasons why I think this is important, but some graphics here. Having everybody attend all the meetings is a smart idea. 88% of you already attend 3 or more. So it's asking basically the majority of you to attend 1 more meeting, 1 more standing committee meeting. By doing this, there's not as much repetition and catching up. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat watching a council meeting or a GIC meeting, to see people saying, well, I wasn't at the standing committee, so I don't know what this issue is. Could I have staff briefing on the subject? Or people just seeming bewildered on an item. That catching up doesn't have to happen if you're there. Secondly, and I say this, standing committees, because they are planning, public works, audit, finance administration, emergency, community services. Like, these are all essentials for the city. I don't understand why any councillor wouldn't be at these meetings. Being there means that the outcomes will be more inclusive, everyone will be more aware, and there'll be more representation at these meetings. It's also where the public delegates, I should mention that. So what I'm suggesting is, that all members come to these standing committees. I think it'll make you all more aware of the important issues facing the city as they're happening. You'll be there live to hear from delegates and staff at the committee level, and then those changes can be made at council. By removing GIC, it would free the calendar up quite a bit as well and allow you to kind of move things around to give everyone more time, including the public, to actually review the things that are being discussed, to delegate in a more clear and transparent manner. It'll also, as a side point, clarify the selection process in December. No one's going to be trying to figure out what committees they're getting onto if everyone's on the same committees. I think it should be eliminated, and all the items that don't fit in one of the standing committees simply just be relegated to the administration part of AF&A. There aren't that AF&A meetings, in my experience, having watched them, tend to be the ones that are either canceled or postponed, or tend to have sometimes lighter agendas. So there's space in AF&A to add more of these kind of miscellaneous items that currently get caught by GIC. Second thing, rewriting the procedural bylaw, and I'll try to be quick here. It's not readable. The reason I put these texts here in red is because they're not good scores. There are some things that are good about the readability of the current bylaw. We'll get to those in the next slide, but these are kind of, I mean, sometimes a little bit outdated, but generally speaking, accepted principles around readability. And the procedural bylaw fails on all of them, except for these two at the end here. They have a pretty good score or a better score with wordiness and use of syllables. And I get it, it's a bylaw. It's not going to be a children's story which is really accessible to read. At the same time, there's no reason why it can't be more accessible and more legible. Over time, it's gotten worse. So I looked at all the bylaws in 2010, 2014, and 2021, and it's slidingly getting worse. So that's a concern I have. You can see it's also getting much longer. So it went from 45 pages to 67 pages. So there's been a huge increase in the number of pages and the number of words over that period of time. So I'm suggesting it should be entirely reworded with clear writing principles and standards, that are in language that's accessible to as many Hamiltonians as possible. The easier it is to read, the easier it will be to interpret. I think of a couple of examples from this term around the word emergency and around the word quorum. These are basic tenets of democracy and the way that procedures for a council work. And I saw so many hours being spent and so much public hand-wringing over the word emergency and the word quorum. If this bylaw was written more clearly, there would be no issue with trying to understand what those mean in practice and in print. It should just be shortened and reorganized. There's a lot of repetition, in my opinion. Places where we could just say, hey, if these two kinds of rules are the same for a standing committee, an advisory committee, and council, we could have one section that just speaks to that entirely. I know that some of those changes have already been made over the last 5 years, but I think there's a lot more that could be done. I've already submitted dozens of suggestions on that privately to the clerk's office, so they have those. So finally, last slide, just to summarize what I'm asking you to do. Number one, change the procedural bylaw so that all members of council attend all standing committee meetings. Eliminate the general issues committee to avoid repetition and to make things more efficient, and give everybody, including the public, more time and notice to discuss issues and delegate to committees. And rewrite, reorganize, and shorten the procedural bylaw to make it easier for council to use, apply, and read. Last thing I'll say, this is my last slide, is that I wasn't able to read all the information, the changes that were in front of you today. This meeting caught me by surprise, to be honest. I was told there wouldn't be another meeting of this committee until next term of council. And I know Carl will talk to these other issues that came up there. I won't be speaking to them today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Cameron. Any questions of the delegate? Recognize Councillor Clark, please.
Good morning, sir, and welcome. My question would be, I don't think you lived in Hamilton around the time of amalgamation. There was this transition board that was created by the provincial government to ostensibly ease the city of Hamilton into the new amalgamated role as opposed to having all of the other municipalities. Originally, they eliminated all the standing committees and put everything into, I think they call it Committee of the Whole, COW. And so they did exactly what you're suggesting. And I think most people would say it became an abject failure. The binders were 2 and 3 and 4 long. The meetings were incredibly long. They didn't conclude meetings. And it just became untenable for 16 people sitting around the table to make every single decision on every single item that normally would go to a standing committee and then just be ratified at council. Have you reviewed any of that material? Because it was quite a significant and controversial period of time in Hamilton.
Yeah, maybe I didn't say it quite clearly. I'm actually suggesting the opposite of that. So what I'm suggesting is we actually keep all the standing committees. All that we do there, though, is have everyone sit on them. And so right now, for instance, if you look at, I don't remember exactly the stats, but there 88% of people already sit on 3 out of the 4, right? So what I'm suggesting is really that everyone sit on all of them. It's not a huge leap for everyone to sit on all standing committees. It wouldn't increase the binder size. What I'm saying is getting rid of GIC and making sure that that information happens at standing committees and everyone is there. Right now what's happening is you have a subsection of councillors who show up to say AFNA or ENCS, right? Where very, very important issues are discussed. They're not present for the committee discussion, the discussion and presentations by staff, the initial delegations by residents, and then it's going to GIC, and all that's being basically repeated. And what's happening there is people are saying, oh, I wasn't at such and such a meeting, or I wasn't at such and such a standing committee, so I missed that. So that layer that GIC represents, I think, is the issue, not the standing committees themselves.
It's an interesting model. I'd have to really give it some thought to see whether or not I would agree that it would be more efficient. Because at the moment I'm concerned about that. Quite candidly, the councillors who have an interest in the items that are before AFNA or any one of the standing committees, they reach out to staff, they inform themselves, and they're prepared for ratification at council, although they may not have been at the standing committee meeting. I can't speak to every single councillor around the room.
Of course.
But I can tell you that if councillors generally read the agendas, the reports, and then reached out to staff prior to standing committee meetings, those standing committee meetings would be much more efficient. And we've seen that at Audit, Finance, and Administration, where the members around that table, and I know them all very well, they actually do reach out to Mr. Zagaric and staff and address those issues. And that's why the AFNA meeting tends to move along quicker than others, because my opinion, I'm entitled, they're more prepared because they reach out to staff and have that conversation. So I appreciate the advice, and I'm going to have to think about it to see whether or not that model would be more efficient for the city. But I do sincerely thank you, because you've done a lot of work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to 2 things you said. One, I think that, of course, this is something to think about. I don't think that today you could implement this and tomorrow it would be real. It's not possible. I think the earliest you could do something like this would probably be 2024. You need 2023 to work out some of the ways of and means of reorganizing the schedule to make it more effective and efficient, and then in 2024 you could implement it. But the second thing I want to address, I think, is a really important one, and you highlighted it maybe not intentionally, is there's a huge ethical question here for me, which is why I'm bringing this forward. It's that this shouldn't be about choices around standing committees. Each standing committee is addressing issues that are vitally important to every single resident. They're vitally important to the functioning of the city. And when councillors aren't at those meetings, they're missing a layer of understanding. And you highlighted it by saying, hey, like, these AFNA meetings are incredibly efficient. And folks are getting information from staff, and they're coming there and they're well informed. And then when they go to council to make a decision, they're making that decision with the best information they can. I think there's a dilution that's happening right now by having people kind of choose which topics they're maybe more interested in, or choose which topics that they feel they can bring the most to, and then kind of picking it up at GIC in a second layer and then making a decision at council. I think tightening up the front end of that, ensuring that everyone is present for those major ethical decisions at those standing committees. Because we're not talking about, a subcommittee or an advisory committee or something which may be dealing with a specific issue that may not necessarily relate to every single ward or every single resident. Standing committees get that kind of privilege because they are those kind of things that address citywide issues. So I think it's important for every councillor to be there.
Yeah, I guess the one glaring one would be the planning committee, because the planning committee addresses specific applications in specific wards as opposed to citywide. But I take your comments, they're fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pearson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation and information. I'm going to certainly reiterate the concerns that Councillor Clark raised. I do remember in the first term of council after amalgamation that it was all General Issues Committee. Everything was dealt with by the one committee. So I guess I'm a little confused, and maybe Cameron, if I can ask you to clarify. You're saying that you want everybody, all councillors, to sit on all the standing committees and eliminate GIC? Is that my understanding? Because you're saying when they go to GIC, if they haven't been at the standing committee meetings and they question what happened there. I'm confused. Am I hearing that correctly?
Mr. Kretsch?
Yeah, you're hearing that correctly. I'll reiterate it slightly. So what I'm suggesting right now is that all members of council go to all 4 of the standing committees. By doing that and being present at each standing committee for all the decisions that are made there, you could eliminate the General Issues Committee, because the General Issues Committee, it does 2 things, right? Number 1, it's a way to bring all the issues from the standing committees up to another level for consideration. And 2, it brings in issues that don't necessarily have a home in some of those standing committees to that General Issues Committee. So I'm proposing kind of 2 things. 1, the items that don't have a home would show up at AFNA under the administration umbrella. Eliminating GIC and having everyone attend to all 4 standing committee meetings means everyone will be aware of all the issues, right? So you wouldn't need to go to GIC to catch up on things or bring them to the next level, because you'd already have been at all the standing committee meetings. The benefit of that, or I guess, pardon me, the sort of what the reality is now is 88% of councillors already go to 3/4 of them. Right? So by eliminating GIC, right, and adding everyone going to all the standing committees, it's not more work. It's just more efficient, in my opinion.
So I appreciate that clarification, but my concern is that General Issues Committee actually specifically deals with, legal issues, budget issues. It's not under, and I see where some could be redirected, but General Issues was Committee of the Whole. So certainly understand your viewpoints. I do have a concern that we're going to fall back into what happened in the first term of council. And that I know was a nightmare for efficiencies, not only for staff, but for the councillors, for the materials to be prepared, for the timelines. But certainly we'll take what you've raised under advisement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vanderbeek, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Cameron. Cameron, I don't really have a question. I have a comment, I think. First of all, thank you. You always do a lot of work, and you're always very clear in what you're asking, and I really appreciate that. You also always leave me with food for thought. So the concern I have about what I'm hearing here is that our GIC meetings are often 8, 10, 12 hours long. And so if we're going to feed that information, those items into the 4 standing committees, sometimes planning is all day long. I don't know what I don't know whether that's going to be more efficient. And one of the things I want to point out that I think bears thinking about as we look at this is that when you sit in a meeting for 10 and 12 hours with a 15-minute break or a half an hour break, sometimes only once in that period of time, and sometimes twice. It's difficult. It's difficult to be sure you're making good decisions when you're frankly exhausted and have information overload sometimes. And so I am wondering whether what appears to be efficiency, or what could be efficiency, will do what the Committee of the Whole meeting did in the early 2000s by basically overwhelming those committees. And I think that think that you have a good point, and I think that it's something that I need to really think about too. But I do want to thank you for bringing it forward and for giving us something else to be looking at, because we should be, and I think we are open to change, because not for the sake of change, but change for improving what's happening in our committees and with our staff, because staff are in those committees too. So if they're in those committees, they're not able to be doing. If they're going to be in long committees 4 days a week, I'm not sure that is more efficient. And so I would be interested in. I'd be interested in looking at that, but I do have some concerns that I need to give some more thought to. And but again, I want to say thank you to you for coming forward and for bringing things, and for giving us a reason to well, not necessarily a reason, but the impetus to relook at what we're doing. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor. Sorry, thank you, Councillor. Mr. Kretsch, I'll recognize you as an opportunity to respond.
Thank you. I want to say really clearly, the committee of the whole thing, I think, is a bit of a red herring in this. I'm not suggesting that. I agree that created a certain kind of stress and a certain kind of generalization that made things more difficult. I'm suggesting the opposite. What I also want to say is that right now, the majority of the things that take up time at GIC, from my understanding of having watched these things for many years now, are the repetitive items. It ends up being an issue that comes to committee, comes to GIC, comes to council, and it's something that gets talked about a fair bit. What I'm saying here is that by eliminating GIC, you're removing a layer of repetition. I do think there's actually space at the committees, which are run more, in my opinion, run more efficiently and more effectively than a general committee, to put these things in and to handle them, frankly, better. So AFNA, which I've seen canceled over the years because there wasn't enough issues to talk about at AFNA, which I've seen run short, sometimes an hour or 45 minutes long. There is space in those meetings to bring in some of these legal issues, like Councillor Pearson said, to bring in some of these other administrative issues into that committee, to resolve the fact that you have these marathon-long meetings in GIC. I don't think, for the most part, you're going to be increasing the workload that's happening there, because a lot of the planning issues are frankly just carbon copies, where you're going to see when they get to GIC. When you get some of the extra work you're talking about, again, I think there's space at AFNA and ENCS, which for whatever reason are slightly less popular committees. I don't know why, but there's space there. And so I think there's a chance to bring efficiency into this system. I think things like the committee of the whole are frankly a bit outdated, that we don't need to be doing that anymore structurally. This is not a parliamentary democracy as much as it's a municipal one.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbeek, okay?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Cameron. I always appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, is the second time?
So, just to be clear, all decisions of standing committees are forwarded to City Council. They're not forwarded to GIC. And then GIC is forwarded to Council. So you're basically saying you want all council members to attend all standing committee meetings as well as the council meeting. Thank you. I just wanted to understand what you were actually asking.
Thank you. Cameron?
Yeah, thank you so much for that clarity. Actually, I probably could have just said that in one slide really simply, and that's my fault. Yeah, because they're already going to council, right? Having the extra layer of GIC in there, I think adds a lot of a bulk, and I think that's where we've seen a lot of marathon meetings, for instance, in that GIC space. Thanks for that clarity. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. If I could, I have a question of staff, so I would ask that after the delegate. Yes.
So to the chair, if it's regarding the report, yes, once we go to that item.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your attendance this morning and for your thoroughness, as always. Delegate 9.2, Mr. Carl Andrus from the Hamilton Community Benefits Network. Mr. Andrus, good morning and welcome.
Is that good? All right, I'll be brief. I've just come here to talk a little bit about something near and dear to my heart, which I'm actually doing right now, which is delegating. Something I do frequently, something I help train residents to do and spend a fair amount of my life doing, it seems, sometimes. And I want to touch on the fact that in order to delegate requires a fair amount of privilege. One has to have spare time, especially during business hours. One has to be able to step away and not to touch on the previous delegates' conversations around procedural matters other than delegation, I do want to mention an item that was raised, which was those marathon GIC sessions. There are times when delegates will sit for hours and hours and hours of their life to come and spend 5 minutes to let you, your elected officials, know what their positions are, what they're passionate about, things that are going on in their life. So my very simple request as we talk about procedural bylaws today, and as you guys consider changes to procedural bylaws, is to give preferential treatment to residents in delegation, to make sure that those delegations come first, foremost, and front and center. And one of the reasons I do that is that delegates don't need to sit through staff reports. They don't need, their positions aren't going to change. When a delegate comes to present an idea, they've read the reports, they're often already online. When a delegate is coming forward, they want to, as quickly as possible, present to you, their elected officials, what they're passionate about, what their positions are, how the item before you affects them, and they're given 5 minutes to do so. So having to sit 1 hour, 3 hours through various staff reports in order to come to you to give 5 minutes of their day to express their opinion on those items and to let you know as their elected representatives, I think should be what you give preference to when you're opening the bylaws, and that's simply what I've come to talk about today, and it's very simple, very succinct. Thank you very much, Chair, staff, and members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrus. Are there any questions of Mr. Andrus? I recognize Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Andrus, I have a question, and I'm just going to throw it out there. Would it be advantageous for delegations to be videoed? And I guess what I'm saying is that the city provide a way for those who don't have a way to videotape their delegation to do so. The reason I'm asking that is because I'm thinking back to the urban boundary meeting, and I think there were 60 delegations, and they took hours. And some people disappeared. They just weren't in a position to be waiting to be delegate number 39 or 50 or whatever. And some of those delegations were videoed. And so I'm wondering if that would be an alternative for items that are important enough that there are, numerous delegations. If that would be an alternative for people who do have to work. I mean, they're doing it now, but I'm wondering whether you think that would suffice for some to alleviate some of these problems. What it does not do, and I recognize it, is it does not give committee an opportunity to ask them further questions or clarification. Mr. Andrus.
Through the chair, thank you for that question. I think that video delegations are an important access tool and something that this council should encourage wherever they can. By mentioning the fact that I think delegations should go before staff presentations and before the rest of business's council is also to give you councillors a chance to ask questions of staff around delegations that you hear. There may be items raised by residents that give you pause or give you a different perspective other than that's before you from staff, and allow you to to ask those questions to staff. So I do agree that absolutely opening access for video delegations, a Much Music delegation booth would certainly be a fun item to have in City Council and may get used. But I think that that's only part of it. And of course, I thank you for respecting the fact that questions are also important for councillors to raise of delegates. But I think keeping video delegations as an accessibility option are very important for a lot of people. But I don't think that's the only solution to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor?
I had another question for him. It slipped my mind. So if I think of it again, I'll just come back for a second time. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Andres.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions for Mr. Andres? Seeing none, I would like to close the delegation part. I would like to, before I go to questions of staff, I would like to say to Mr. Cretchen, to Mr. Andres, that you are frequent delegators. And I understand and appreciate that that takes not just your time today, but it takes your time in advance of today, because your comments are always thoughtful and constructive. You come with identification of problems, but always solutions. And I think what you're underscoring is putting the local in local democracy, and it is in our collective interest to encourage participation in whatever way possible, and including enabling people the opportunity within their day to delegate and participate. So I'm very, very grateful for your participation ongoing and for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we had a mover and a seconder to receive. Not yet. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek to receive the delegations.
And these are the delegations on item 10.4.
Yes, beg your pardon. Thank you. It carries 4-0. Elsie McCrae, some direction. May I ask my questions now, or does that go at the end of all the delegates?
So procedurally, if we could finish the delegations, and then when we can go to the items, ask questions of staff.
Thank you so much. We will now hear the delegates who have registered to speak on item 10.1. We will receive them all. And just a reminder to our delegates who are joining us, their delegate time is for 5 minutes, and then questions follow, obviously, your delegation. 9.3 has been withdrawn, so I will go to 9.4. Marlene Dea I had this. Dea Moa. Beg your pardon, Marlene. Committee Against Racism.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Governance Review Subcommittee. My name is Marlene Damois, and I am the Vice Chair of the Committee Against Racism. Why I'm here today is really to amplify the voices of the community who are requesting an equitable pathway to ensure their voice is taken into consideration in the selection of the citizen appointee to the Hamilton Police Services Board. And I think when I talk about community, I think it's important to reference who they are. So CAR has been working in alignment with HARC, which is the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center. And also when I say community, I'm talking about the Hamilton Black leadership community, the Hamilton Jewish leadership community, the Hamilton Muslim leadership community, Hamilton's Indigenous leadership community, Hamilton's LGBTQ2IA community, youth representatives, and other equity-seeking communities. So I just think it's important to mention when I say community who I'm referencing. When reviewing the options that have been presented by the feasibility study, we would endorse and recommend option B. We want to look at creating a new structure, not readjusting an old structure, which really that did not benefit us. I think here there is an opportunity for the city of Hamilton to lead in terms of looking at option B, and also to lead with the understanding that another community has actually gone before us and actually established a new selection committee, which is also what we are asking in terms of the City of London. So it's not like we would be leading this initiative without having the ability to have some consultation and look at some of the guidelines that the City of Hamilton is considering by referencing what some of the things that have occurred at the City of London. I think when I looked at the feasibility study and noted in terms of some of the expectations of the people on the selection committee, I think confidently as a community, we can adhere to the code of conduct for the local boards and also the expectation of confidentiality. And I think it's really important that we take this opportunity to create this pathway. And in creating a pathway and forging ahead, we need to do something that's new. We need to do something that deconstructs the particular system that is in place, because I think you heard from community that that system is not um, supporting what the community wants. And I think when you think of that system and you think about what the request is from the community, is that we're asking for the opportunity to put forward um, two potential appointees to the Hamilton Police Services Board. That's all we're asking for. And I really think that it's important that this council thinks about that and thinks about ways to um, support and contribute to hear contributions from the community as to who are the two people that we would put forth that we as a community, as a collective community, are saying can benefit us at the Hamilton Police Services Board. So I think that it's really important that we consider doing this. And I think for the community, there's a sense of urgency, because I don't think we can wait until the next term of council. Because if I specifically think of CAR gets disbanded, and then there's a whole process of engagement and recruitment and a reestablishment and the committee. And that is a lot of time that's going to be spent doing that and not being able to concentrate on this specific request that we're making today. So I think if council will consider making this recommendation so that CAR, when it is disbanded and then sort of reconstructed, will know that this is the pathway that they can continue on. So it's an opportunity to set sort of the foundations and the pathway for the new CAR committee to come aboard and ensure that we operationalize the request that's before you today. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Deamoa. Are there any questions of the delegate this morning? Councillor Clark, please.
Good morning, Marlene. It's been a long time. Pleasure to see you this morning. Oops. Okay, yeah, there we go. So I'm trying to clarify exactly the request. So you're, for all intents and purposes, requesting that for the appointment of Police Service Board citizen members, that there be involvement from HARC, your committee, and a number of other committees. Are you asking that there be a number of individuals that would be appointed to that selection committee for those Police Service Board positions? Or are we talking about, I think the report talks about 2 co-chairs, and we have a chair of the selection committee currently, but they deal with everything, all boards and agencies. So we're speaking specifically to the Police Service Board and the concept of having 2 co-chairs and additional members on that selection committee. Can you just exactly what the number is that you're talking about?
Through the chair, what we're requesting is that when there is a recommendation needed to appoint the citizen appointee to the Hamilton Police Services Board, what we're requesting is that the community that I spoke about and emphasize the Black, the Jewish, Muslim, etc. Community are able to appoint those to put forward 2 names for consideration by council. So it's what we're looking at specifically, and the way that I interpreted the report is one was looking at all of the committees within sort of the city of Hamilton and that sort of thing. And the option B was looking specifically at the Hamilton Police Services Board. So my response is specifically to option 2 in terms of looking at the construction of the Hamilton Police Service Board.
And so the names that you would be putting forward, you'd be in essence endorsing 2 people to be considered by the board, and then there would be a person that sits directly on the selection committee? Is that, I think that's the way I'm getting shaking heads at me. That's not the way I'm reading it.
No.
I'm sorry, can we just get clarification? Because I'm a little bit confused. I'm sorry, Marlene.
That's
Sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Diamoa. I'm wondering at this time if it would be procedurally appropriate for me to recognize our city clerk who could summarize option A and summarize option B and underscore the distinction between the 2 of them. Are you okay with that, Ms. Diamoa?
Yes, I'm fine with that. Thank you. Through the chair.
I am interrupting your delegation. So I think the committee is on board with that. So I would like to recognize Clerk Holland, please.
Hi, that's okay. City Clerk Andrew Holland. And I'll have Janet jump in if I'm getting anything incorrect. So before you, the 2 alternatives we put, so under the procedural bylaw, there is a selection committee. I believe there's 9 members of council on that selection committee. That selection committee, at the beginning of a term of council, does interviews and selection for council to consider appointing on all of your ABCs. So that would be your committee of adjustment, heritage committee, like all of those big ones. All of your citizen advisory committees, that's done through selection committees under the standing committee of which they report to. So this is a different selection committee. So we reviewed the recommendations that came from the CAR report. And what we really want council to consider is whether there is an interest in changing your selection committee for your ABCs, or, which is option A, and option B is creating a new selection committee just for the citizen position who will be on the HPSB.
Right.
And what we are asking council is, do you want to do that, and what do you want that selection committee to look like? Because we will need some, if you make a decision on either, we're going to need some decisions on what you want the makeup of that committee to look like. And we will need to do a terms of reference, all that kind of stuff.
And the CAR report, sorry to interject on this, suggested a ratio of committee representatives and council representatives, correct?
Yes, and we will need direction from committee on what you want that to be.
My apologies. Councillor Clark.
I appreciate that. I was confused when I'm looking back and forth going between the 2, so I understand the request. Thank you very much, Marlene.
Through the chair, you're welcome.
Thank you, Marlene. I don't know if you had any comments post Clerk Holland's explanation, or if your delegation is now complete.
Madam Chair, my delegation is now complete. Thank you so much.
Okay, no, thank you very much for being here this morning. Any further questions? Seeing none. Delegate, Mr. Lyndon George, 9.5 from the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center. Good morning, Mr. George. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and thank you for having me. Before I begin, I'd like to perhaps indicate where I'm located here today. Our office is at the McMaster Continuing Education Center, which is just adjacent to James Street. And as many Hamiltonians will know, this weekend is Supercrawl, and it appears that the sound check has just started about a few moments ago. So this is a very serious conversation, but I want you to know I'm not playing any music in the background here today. So just so you know.
Thank you for Thank you for putting your setting in context for us. And if for some reason I'm not able to hear you because of that background noise, I'll let you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please proceed.
So the question is, how do we make collective change happen in Hamilton? How do we build a more inclusive city? How do we support the efforts by members of the city's Committee Against Racism? Today, we have that opportunity to take bold, principled action to include diverse community voices at the table of Hamilton's Police Service Board. The staff report outlines in option B, the creation of a new selection committee for the Hamilton Police Service Board. And I ask you to not delay, but to seize the moment and to make a small but significant change in how we appoint the resident position to the Hamilton Police Service Board. Amending bylaws, corporate policies, and establishing a new selection committee is the key and vital next step this committee can take to empower the next council to build on the foundation you are setting here today. Make no mistake, this is one seat. There are 7 members on the Police Service Board. But I know, as you do, we have a lot of work to do to build trust in our public institutions. Doing this sends the message that diverse voices chosen by community members matters. The City of London has taken the step to bring community groups into the system and the way in which they choose their community representative. And now Hamilton can too. So I want to be absolutely clear. As the Executive Director of Hamilton's Anti-Racism Resource Center, we support CAR's recommendation here that this change should happen now. We've had conversations with community groups. We've had other members delegate previously to talk about the importance and the significance of this change. And I'm asking here today for us to do that heavy lifting and that important work. And I thank you all for this opportunity here today to speak with you.
Thank you, Mr. George. Are there any questions of Mr. George this morning? Mr. George, we were able to hear you loud and clear, and there are no questions of you this morning. We appreciate your participation and your diligence as always. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
A mover and a seconder to receive the delegates, please. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. The vote is up. That carries 4-0. On to discussion items. 10.1, feasibility of implementing the recommendations from the Committee Against Racism for changes to the Hamilton Police Services Board selection process, FCS 22072. I need a mover and a seconder. Put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Pearson and seconded by myself on the floor. Are there any discussion on this item, please? Recognize Councillor Clark.
Thank you. So I like option B as described by Clerk Holland. Under option B, what decisions need to be made today? Are we, in essence, picking the number of community members that would be sitting on the selection committee for the Hamilton Police Services Board?
Clerk Holland.
Through the chair, we are looking for direction from committee today to find out. There are proposed percentages that came out of the CAR report, and we are looking for committee's decision on what those percentages need to be, if any. And we are also looking for, if you wish us to return with the terms of reference. There are a number of options that you can do. Do you want them, how many members? Do you want specific community groups present? We would need to know that as well. Represented on that committee? Are there specific, do you want some to be voting rights? Do you want non-voting rights? it's really up to committee to decide how they want to do the makeup of their selection committee.
Thank you.
And Chair,
Sorry, Janet, did you wish to add? I saw your finger up, and I apologize, Councillor.
no, don't apologize. Gave me more time to think.
Janet Pilon, Deputy Clerk. Option B is Appendix F.
Yes.
And it actually provides you with all of the information that we would require.
So we would work our way down through that. Thank you.
So we're supposed to pick the, I've got it open right now in front of me, and that's what I'm looking at.
Excellent.
Either the number of members of councillors or the percentage. So if we wanted 50-50, would say 50% council, 50% community. And if we, is there a selection committee to select the selection committee? Is that, like, how does the community members get appointed to this committee?
Clerk Andrea Holland.
Through the chair, it depends. So you can decide, as an example, you can decide that you want the chair of HARC to be on the committee. Or you can decide that there will be an application process and that we will do a selection for the citizens who will sit on that selection committee. Absolutely. It is entirely up to committee how they want to either directly appoint people based on their position in the community, or do you want a selection process for citizens to sit on this committee?
Thinking.
And so we could, in theory, what are we looking at here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I guess, there isn't really a youth organization. We could ask, for example, the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, HARC, to either appoint their chair or an individual of HARC from their board. We could ask the Hamilton Black leadership community to do the same thing and go down the line, and each one of them could select who they wish to sit on the committee. Or the alternative, we could select who they would be from applications.
Correct.
There was also talk about a co-chair. Can you speak to that?
Through the chair, it would not be my recommendation to do a co-chair. Typically, the chair controls the meeting.
Yes.
Not the decision-making.
Yes. I agree with you there.
To Clerk Holland, the co-chair reference was in option A, which is not our focus at this time, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
You could absolutely have a citizen as automatically the vice chair.
I like option B. I'm looking for assistance from my colleagues in terms of how many numbers, and because ultimately we have to make this recommendation to AFNA and they make it to council. I would like, my personal preference, if Lyndon, as I guess the staff person with HARC, was on this committee. I think it's appropriate. We spent a great deal of time and effort creating HARC, and having them involved in this process I think would be appropriate. But beyond that, I'd like to hear from my colleagues in terms of what we think the proper makeup would be.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Are there any other of my colleagues who wish to speak to this matter right now? Hearing none, if I could ask Councillor Vanderbeek to assume the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will take the chair. Just had to find the mute button.
Thank you. Thank you very much for doing that. I too am going to be consistent, I think, in listening to community and the very voices who have done the work up to and including this point favor option B. I favor option B as well, taking their advice, but just also as part of my own review this report. My preference would be for the community members to select who they would wish to sit on the option B selection committee, because they know their membership, and being sensitive also to differences in how sometimes decision-making is made, and the comfort of some to even come into certain formal environments of the city right now. So that would be my preference. And in terms of keeping with the percentage break, if I could ask, before I comment on that, a question through the chair to Councillor Holland. The recommendation that, Clerk Holland. I'll see you tonight. I'll see you tonight on the doors. If I could ask Clerk Holland through the chair, just to clarify for me, the recommendation that would come from this new selection committee as set out in option B, is that recommendation, does it go to council for ratification, or is that recommendation the recommendation through the chair?
Clerk Holland?
Hi, through the chair. It goes to AF&A, then to council.
Thank you. So, my apologies. Thank you. So, in keeping with a representative democracy, the domain of council still, it retains its domain ultimately of that decision, correct? Of the selection. So my preference in response to my thoughtful colleague is, because that domain persists and insists, I would favor the recommendation that comes from the community, and that's 60-40. Thank you. And I'll take the chair back.
And I'll happily pass it back.
Did you say thoughtful?
Yes, I did.
Oh my gosh.
Had 2 coffees today. Any other comments from members of this subcommittee? Questions? I see none, but I do recognize I did it again. Clerk Holland.
Through the chair, if I could indulge committee, just so we could walk through the questions, and I just want to make sure that we have captured what you wish to amend. And Appendix F, I'm just going to ask Janet to walk through it with you to make sure that we're capturing this correctly, because when it comes to, especially that the citizens will be doing the selection for the citizens that will sit, we want to make sure we're capturing the correct community groups that will be providing you with a member to sit on this committee.
Thank you. That's a really excellent recommendation. Thank you. Deputy Clerk.
Okay, so what I've gleaned from the conversation, that you would like to go with a 40% council membership and a 60% community membership of this selection committee, and it's creating a new selection committee for the selection of the one person on the Hamilton Services Board. Correct? I'm thinking yes. Okay.
Yes, so far.
And you would prefer not to have co-chairs? In this case, you want to have a chair and vice chair, so we wouldn't need that amendment. Okay, under A, it has an amendment, AI, to change the chairing to co-chairs, but we're going to not require that at this point. The definition of selection committee has to be amended. Okay, and we're going to put 60% in the first X and 40% in the second X. Okay, that it means a committee established by council comprised entirely of members of council to interview and report back to council on the appointment of citizen representatives to agency boards and committees, and reports directly to council, with the exception of the Hamilton Police Services Board Selection Committee for recruitment of the one person appointed by resolution of council to the Hamilton Police Services Board, which is comprised of 60% community representatives and 40% council representatives with full voting privileges. Okay, so we go down to B, and the Hamilton Police Services Board Selection Committee for the recruitment of one person appointed by resolution of council to the Hamilton Police Services Board be comprised of, so the number will go in there. What is the size of the committee that you were considering? So we can go 60-40. 10?
9 or 10? The current one is 9.
There's a question from my colleague, if you could clarify or verify whether the existing selection committee is the size of 9?
I believe it's 9.
1, 2, 3, 4,
But you
5, 6,
could
7, 8.
select a smaller number of councillors for this specific Hamilton Police Services Board Selection Committee. Rather than having 9, you could go 6 and 4.
I'm going to recognize Councillor Clark, please, and then myself, if there's no others. Thank you.
Thank you. So for the benefit of this selection committee, I think it would be ideal if we don't have an even number. You want to have a conclusive decision come out of that selection committee. So it could be 9. I guess you could come up with numbers for that.
9 members of council?
We have 9 members of council now on it, so it would be 9 members of the selection committee. So I'm not good at math, so help me. We'll cut a councillor in half.
The selection committee now, the membership, as per the terms of reference,
Yes.
are the minimum of 5 members. So currently we have 9. But we won't know the size of the selection committee until the next term of council. So
Clerk
do we want to
Holland?
just put in the percentages there as well? And then we can put in the numbers later?
Clerk Holland.
I know, can you see the smoke? Through the chair, so could I recommend that we use numbers instead of percentages? It's far easier. I would recommend you do 6 members of the community and 5 members of council. That gives you an odd number, and you can easily do selection. I think when it comes to the 6 community members, we would be looking from committee where those people will be resourced from. When I look at, and this came from the CAR report, the youth representative or Hamilton's LGBTQ2A1 community that's a bit broad, so who's going to be making that selection? So if you could try to narrow that down to us, the Hamilton Muslim leadership community, is it a specific body that we're going to get that member from?
I want to clarify that because I was under the impression it was this.
We just want to we want it to be very clear to the community and to council where we're going to be, these people will be coming from.
Councillor Clark, I think you have the floor still. Thank you, Clerk Holland.
I sincerely think that the clerk has made a good suggestion, so I think if we do it by number, it is much clearer. We want to eliminate as much confusion or doubt as possible to ensure a successful selection process. So I think having the numbers makes sense. And then we go from there.
So we're going 6 members of the community and 5 members of council?
Yes.
I believe that's the recommendation on the floor.
Well, I thought the community request
60-40.
60-40, so yeah, I think that would work. And I'd go there.
Okay. So we're changing those numbers in B to the first number 6 and the second 5.
And the chair and vice chair are members of those numbers. They're not additional members.
Correct.
Correct. That's fine. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. But I think there is an outstanding issue on the floor, and that is, which maybe we should have sought clarity from Ms. Deamoa and Mr. George, is the, I'll be frank, blunt, who is the Hamilton Black Leadership Community? And how do we go about in creating a vehicle for selection and receipt of that name? And I think originally my thought was we'll leave it to the community, because obviously up until this point, the community has gotten this report this far. I don't know if that is specific enough for staff, and I'm seeing no, it's not.
Through the chair, we could reach back to the 2 delegates who came today and ask us to give definitive bodies, and we could bring that to AFNA for decision, if that works.
I think if I could just ask you, there would be an opportunity for another meeting in advance of, before October 24th, or?
Sorry, I don't know what you're referring to.
The definitiveness in which you're seeking this decision on the selection committee will guide the appointment process for the next term of council, correct?
Correct.
So so will you need that definitiveness this term of council, or can that clarity be brought at the start of next term of council for your consultation to be had?
Let me just touch base with Janet, because typically we do the recruitment for the different positions, so it would be more helpful to have the selection committee. What I'm recommending is that I reach back to the 2 delegates to get definitive community groups identified here for AFNA to consider when they consider this report. And that will be done before the end of September.
Yes, beg your pardon.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Clerk Holland, always instructive. Councillor Clark.
So I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, and I think we all are. Is it possible that we could go back to HARC and ask HARC to be the body that brings forth suggested names for that committee, so that it keeps it back in the community, but as opposed to us trying to deal with a number of community groups, we deal with HARC, and they deal with a number of community groups and come back with names to us. Would that make sense?
Through the chair, yes, that's what I'm suggesting.
Oh.
It might be because there's too many mics on.
Clerk Holland.
You're on.
Through the chair, yes, that's what I'm suggesting, that I would go back to CAR and HARC to get those community groups.
Okay.
And so they would, in essence, if I understand
Yeah, I would not be selecting them.
correct.
No.
And we would
No,
not
it
be
comes from
selecting
them.
It comes from the community. We select the councillors.
Yep.
I think that makes eminent sense.
And I will bring a list longer than 6 for you to contemplate.
Perfect.
That works?
Thank you.
Deputy Clerk, did you wish to speak? Thank you for that.
So what I'm going to change that recommendation in B to and 6 community representatives as recommended by CAR.
And HARC.
And HARC. Okay, because CAR's recommendations were that the community representatives for the selection committee come from those groups. So we'll let them provide us with their recommended representatives.
Thank you.
Okay, so that the process okay, so C, that the process for the selection of the 6 community representative to be appointed to the Hamilton Police Services Board Selection Committee for the recruitment of one person appointed by resolution of council to the Hamilton Services Board be as follows. That the selection committee for the selection of the 6-member community representatives to be appointed to the Hamilton Police Services Board Selection Committee for the recruitment of one person appointed by resolution of council. I'm sorry for the repetition, but that's what it is. Be comprised of members of council, 5 members of council appointed and appointed to them for the current term of council. And why have I got that? I'll have to look at that one, but anyway. The selection committee based on the selection of 6 for the current term of council. Okay, I think we can finish that at the end of that term of council. 2, that the community organization listed in subsection B be requested to, so it's not, we're going to that CAR be requested. And HARC, sorry, I keep forgetting that. Be requested to encourage qualified candidate applicants to submit applications to be appointed to the selection committee for agencies, boards, and committees for the recruitment of one person. So I don't believe we need that because CAR is going to be making those recommendations. Correct. So 2 is not required. The selection committee for the selection of the 6 to be appointed to recruitment of the adhere to the corporate policy. So that's okay, that the 6 representatives appointed adhere to the code of conduct. Okay, so, and that the corporate policy for the appointment of citizens to the city, so can we be amended to add a new subsection 14 as follows, so that the selection committee for the selection of the 6 community representatives to be appointed to the Hamilton Police Services.
Because they're doing it, they're providing us.
So we're taking out that whole D.
Yep.
Because we're not, it's not required at this point. That the corporate policy be amended to add a new subsection 15, which now would be 14, renumbering the remaining subsections accordingly, so that the 11, or so that the 5 members of council appointed to the Hamilton Police and the 6 members of council, yeah, this one will be amended. In term of council, members of council, 5 members of the committee.
Through the chair,
6.
so we will make sure that the minutes that come to AFNA are reflective of all the changes that we've done today. So you'll have your final review on that. Because there are a few sections that will no longer apply, because we had originally said that council would be selecting the members from the community. So we've changed all that today.
Then we also have the number of preferred candidates council will consider. CAR wants us to consider 2 at council. We currently only consider 1 from the selection committee. So that has to be, did you want to submit 2 preferred candidates to council for consideration? Or just the 1 from the selection committee, like we currently do?
Just so that I'm clear, the recommendation was submit 2, and then council from the 2 selects 1.
1, right.
Okay, and that would be
Yeah.
the choice. Councillor Clark, did you wish to speak to the matter? And I'm sorry, I have my my head, because I'm looking at staff, I have my head to the screen, and I apologize to Councillor Vanderbeek and Councillor Pearson if I have missed you. It's not intentional. Thank you.
She's capturing the important one in the room. Teasing, yes. So currently, I just, if you don't mind, Chair, can I just talk out loud for a minute so that I understand this?
Please.
Currently, the selection committee makes the recommendation of 1 name and that goes to council. Then council, if they wish to debate that, they go in camera to make a decision before I heard any of the name being. And so then the suggestion here would be there would be 2 recommended names to council, and council would pick one of those 2 recommended names. Did I get that right? Okay.
For the public record, I'm seeing the nodding of heads. You got that right.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
So 2 then? Because we'll do that. Okay, thank you. There's one thing.
Deputy Clerk, you need further instruction or clarification?
You asked a question earlier about, I thought it was in relation to this recommendation going to AFNA and then to council. Were you referring to the appointment of the person for the Police Services Board? How that? Okay, because that would go from selection to council. It doesn't go to AFNA. Right. Okay, thank you. So if the selection makes an appointment or a recommendation for an appointment, it goes directly to council.
Yeah.
But I thought it was this recommendation.
So sorry, members of the public who may be watching this deliberation, just for your information, we're just seeking some a procedural clarity on what we've just agreed to, and so we're listening intently to our staff, Clerk Holland and Deputy Clerk Janet, who are just clarifying some items between themselves so that we can proceed. And I think that clarity has been brought. Okay, I'm seeing a nodding of heads. Great. So to my committee members, subcommittee members, I'm wanting to go to you to see if there are any questions or points that need clarification at this time. It's not at all a reflection on staff, but it was very thick thinking that we had to work our way through. I think we knew the principles that we were guided by, but it was making sure we were consistent and clear on which option best captured that sought deliverable. So not a reflection on staff, but just making sure we had our T's and our I's dotted there. I see no further speakers on this matter, and I'm looking to Elsie McCrae for some guidance.
So through the chair, the report was just an information report. So procedurally, we'd want to give staff direction now to proceed with option B as outlined in Appendix F with the changes to be approved, if that is the will of committee.
Committee, is that your will? I hear no objection to that suggestion. Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder to bring that forward.
So through the chair, the report to be received was already put on the floor. This would be to approve option B, which wasn't a recommendation in the report.
Would you like to move it?
I'm fine if no one else wishes to move it. I'm happy to.
It's moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Wilson. That carries 4-0. Thank you all very much, and thank you very much to staff for assisting us with that matter. On to 10.2, Integrity Commissioner and Lobbyist Registrar Contract. A mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. Please, any discussion on the item? I recognize Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to speak to this. I have real concerns about even thinking about extending a contract for what amounts to 5 years on the cusp of a new council. And I'm most concerned that that a council where, I mean, we're in lame duck, and I'm not suggesting that doing something in lame duck with this is the issue for me. What the issue is a council that's going to change dramatically, basically foisting an integrity commissioner of our choice on a new council. And so I have other concerns besides that, but that I just don't think it's appropriate for this council to be recommending and approving an integrity commissioner who is going to be sitting in judgment on issues brought to them with regard to the appropriateness of actions by the future council. And so, Madam Chair, I do have an amendment that I'd like to put forward at the appropriate time. You can come back to me. I think that there's a better way to handle that. And I think that we have a responsibility to do it just a little different. So if you would like my amendment now, I'm happy to put it forward. If you would prefer, I don't see anyone else on the speakers list at the moment. If you would prefer me to wait, I'm happy to do either, but I would like to put a motion on the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Van Der Beek. Are there any, before that motion is entertained, would anyone who's on the subcommittee wish to speak to it? Councillor Clark, to the report, rather?
So I'm familiar with the amendment, and I'm happy to second the amendment at the appropriate time. I would like to speak about another issue with regards to the Integrity Commission, and I don't want to interfere with the procedural process that you're in now. So if you wanted to deal with the amendment first and then come back to me and we could speak to it. My comments are not specific to the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. So, Councillor Van Der Beek, you have a motion at the ready, and I think you have an identified seconder in Councillor Clark. Would you like to, for the public record, read out the motion?
Yes. So the proposed motion would change the current recommendation to recognize that what I said, which is the looking at a 5-year extension, to change that to that we look at an extension to May 31st, 2023. So that's a 6-month extension, which I believe will give time for the clerk and council to come back. So here's what it says. It says the council approve the extension to contract C20619, provision of services of an integrity commissioner and lobbyist registrar for the city of Hamilton until May 31st, 2023, and that the city clerk be authorized to negotiate, enter into and execute the extension and any ancillary documents required to give effect thereto with principles integrity in a form satisfactory to the city solicitor. And that, so it doesn't change, it then says, the next point is that the city clerk inform council on the results of that negotiation. And the next point is that the city clerk report back to the governance review subcommittee by March 31st, 2023, with a recruitment selection process option for future appointments to the integrity commissioner position, as well as the option to further extend the current contract past May 31st, 2023. And if you don't mind, I'll just speak to that for 1 second.
Please.
Maybe two. The idea is that there are other municipalities are appointing their integrity commissioner in other ways. And I think it behooves council to look at how we appoint our integrity commissioner, how long we appoint the integrity commissioner for, whether we appoint an integrity commissioner whose contract would come up on the cusp of an election, and many other things. And so I think that if we give the new council 6 months to deal with how they want to appoint the integrity commissioner and how that contract would look and what the options are that, you know, in considering what other municipalities are doing. And that gives the clerk time to come back with that. And it would give them until the end of March, which still leaves 2 months to undergo any process. And so they don't have to come back at the end of March. They can come back before that. But Q1 of 2023 to the new council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderbeek. Any comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, it's clear before us for a vote. That carries 4-0. Thank you, members. Thank you, Councillor Vanderbeek. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair Wilson. I'd like us also to consider one added direction to staff. And let me preface it with a bit of a comment. I've often found it unseemly that the council gets to pick their integrity commissioner, in essence, their judge and jury, to handle any complaints that come in. And up until now, I've not had a solution to that feeling that gnawed at me. I can recall when I requested the integrity review with the situation that I had earlier this year. From that point on, I declared a conflict of interest on anything that was dealing with the integrity commissioner coming before council, because I felt it was inappropriate that since my conduct was under review, that I would also be making decisions on salaries, terms, et cetera, on the integrity commissioner. The Ottawa City Council now has a model whereby they have basically assigned the responsibility and duty of selecting the integrity commissioner to 3 senior members of city staff. And I think it would be prudent if the City of Hamilton of Council were to ask our clerk to review that model and bring forward options for the new council. I don't think we should be making that decision, exactly the same as Councillor Vanderbeek on her amendment, but I think we should be asking staff to be prepared and to come forward with an information report and options for the new council that they may wish to direct the selection process, the recruitment process, all of that through 3 staff members. It could be, for example, the executive director of HR, it could be our clerk, it could be the city solicitor. So 3 people of our senior leadership team would be making those decisions, and that removes the city council from any questions of propriety or relationships with the integrity commissioner. It's really up to the staff to do that. So if I may, I would suggest that just an amendment to this, that we direct staff to prepare an information report on options to be presented to the new council or governance committee. I'm not sure where it would go.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Clerk Holland?
Through the chair, Councillor Clark, I believe that's captured in C of the amendment. That's my understanding, that I will be doing a review of other municipalities and reporting back on their recruitment process.
And that would capture Ottawa?
That would capture, yes, yeah.
Okay.
I've already done a lot of that investigation. I'm happy to report back in Q1 next year to the new council and present those options, as well as the option to, of course, extend the existing contract further past May of next year.
Okay.
That's my interpretation. Yep.
Okay, that's good. If that's, everyone's on the same page, perfect. Thank you.
So committee members, thank you very much. So we had a motion that was passed, so we'll have the item approved as amended. Thank you. Item 10.2, thank you, colleagues. A mover and a seconder. Can we go with the movers, Councillor Pearson and Vanderbeek? Thank you. That carries 4-0. Thank you. 10.3, mandatory COVID-19 vaccination verification policy for members of council and members of council appointed committees. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the item on the floor? Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Clark. Is there any discussion on this item? I don't see any. If I could ask Councillor Vanderbeek to assume the chair while I just have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor. So through the chair to Clerk Holland, for public consumption, with respect to members of council, what this means is that information is being provided, I think, to all candidates about the city's policy. And if members of council and the public will not know if a member of council is vaccinated or not now or upon their successful election. Through the chair.
Through the chair, we do not release personal health information about staff or members of council.
Okay. Thank you. And through the chair, then, could you, for the public record, speak to that part of the report which involves the Integrity Commissioner and how that might be triggered and whether or not what kind of information would be made public following a review by that Integrity Commissioner? Through the chair.
Through the chair, staff were asked, directed by council, to come back with language regarding what non-compliance would look like for members of council, especially the new members of council coming in. If a new member of council were to be non-compliant with the policy, they would be reported to, under the changes proposed, they would be reported to the Integrity Commissioner. The Integrity Commissioner would then conduct their investigation. Anything being made public would only be made public through a report through the Integrity Commissioner.
So just so that I'm clear, through the chair, how is a report to the Integrity Commissioner for investigation triggered?
Through the chair, that will be triggered through non-compliance under this policy.
So further clarity through the chair, then that would put the onus on staff then, because you would have a record?
Correct. That record is captured by HR.
Okay, thank you. And if a member of council, a new member of council, is found to be, by the Integrity Commissioner, not compliant, is that report made public?
Anytime the Integrity Commissioner creates a report, it must be considered by council.
Okay. Thank you for your responses.
And just to clarify, that report is always made public.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderbeek. Chair Vanderbeek, I will assume the chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
So I'm not opposed to the policy, but I think there's a hiccup. If we don't reveal by policy health information on any individual that works for the City of Hamilton, including councillors, and we kick it to the Integrity Commissioner and they make the report public, then we are in fact revealing health information in public. So how do I, what do they call it? Put the square peg in the round hole, or vice versa?
For members of the public joining us today also for this deliberation is Ms. Fontana, our Head of Human Resources.
So thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Clark. The information, in terms of being non-compliant with the policy, doesn't necessarily mean that they have not been vaccinated, that we would be inadvertently sharing medical information. It could be they haven't shared or provided any information, that they've not responded to our inquiries, or there's medical exemptions, provisions that are not non-compliant. There's a number of factors that would be considered, and it's not necessarily that the individual has not been vaccinated. It's just that they're non-compliant, and that has various implications. Individuals, we had some, as an example, we had some employees that simply just refused to advise us of their vaccination status. That made them non-compliant. It didn't mean that they were unvaccinated. So inadvertently, we're not sharing medical information.
Thank you.
Is it possible to get comment from the Integrity Commissioner, because we're adding this to their bailiwick? Perhaps get their guidance on how we would do that appropriately?
Clerk Holland.
Through the chair, so we did engage the Integrity Commissioner a few months ago when this report first came forward, and their recommendation that because initially council had asked that this be covered under the Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct speaks to adherence to corporate policy. So it was the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation that anything to do with the policy and compliance with the policy is dealt with within the policy itself, or what non-compliance would look like. So non-compliance within the policy for members of council is that it is reported to the Integrity Commissioner. So that's what council asked us to put in there.
It's not necessarily a code of conduct complaint, it's rather non-compliance with policy.
Correct.
Okay, as long as we've touched base with them, because it's not the normal process for a code of conduct to have health issues addressed in that manner.
That's why it's contained within the policy, what non-compliance looks like.
For the record, I've had 4 shots now.
Thank you, Councillor. Well done. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So through you to staff, can you tell me, just to be clear, what is the policy for all of our staff now? What is it that was approved most recently?
Ms. Fontana.
So through you, Madam Chair, the current policy in terms of compliance for full vaccination, being at this point two doses of the vaccine, that requirement has been paused for our current employees. We've also paused the rapid testing. It just, right at this point, the requirement is our new employees must provide proof of vaccination, full vaccination. So the current employees do not have to provide that proof. We've suspended those components of the policy, including the rapid testing. However, new employees have to provide proof of full vaccination, being 2 doses at this point.
Okay, thank you. So through you, Madam Chair. Why would we not have a similar policy for counselors? Like, why would we have a policy for staff and a policy for counselors?
Clerk Holland, please.
Through the chair, so what is before you today is what was directed to us from council to come back with language that said non-compliance, they would be reported to the Integrity Commissioner.
Yeah.
So we developed the language and we brought it forward.
So thank you. And so through you, Madam Chair, so there is no consequence for any of our 7,000 staff, or 8, whichever, I've heard both, if they don't adhere to a policy for full vaccination because we've suspended it, we've paused it.
Ms. Fontana?
So through you, Madam Chair, yes, we've paused the termination provisions of the policy. Yes, there is no requirement to provide proof of full vaccination.
For existing.
For existing
Yeah,
employees.
but
yes.
that's different and distinct from what would be new.
So I'm just having a little difficulty with a policy for staff and a policy for counselors that where the consequence for a counselor is the Integrity Commissioner. So what is I guess in my mind, what I'm trying to figure out is, what is the Integrity Commissioner going to be assessing? Is the counselor compliant or not? Well, that's pretty easy. If they haven't had full vaccination, they're not compliant with a policy that we have in place. So what is the consequence? Are we going, is that going to mean that they're summarily going to be docked pay, or I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that I fully understand where we're going with this. I understand the intent. I understood the intent for staff. We've paused consequences for staff, current staff, but we're not going to pause consequences for council.
New members.
For
Councillor,
new members of council.
Yeah.
So let's just say the new member comes to the inaugural, but they're not fully vaccinated because of, for whatever reason, they're not fully vaccinated and they aren't qualifying for an exemption. Does that mean they can't be inaugurated? They can't come to the inaugural? Does it mean that instantly that new councillor has the Integrity Commissioner doing a report on them? And truthfully, I haven't had time to do something to warrant an Integrity Commission complaint. So everybody's going to know why they're at the Integrity Commissioner. I have a real problem with that, and I don't think that I am willing to support that. As much as I understand the intent, and I support the intent, I don't think I can support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from my fellow subcommittee members? If I could ask Councillor Vanderbeek to assume the chair. Thank you. I appreciate the comments and the questions which have sought to bring clarity to this. I do support this. And in fact, I would think it is such that we are being consistent in how we're treating new employees and newly elected members of council. So for that reason, and also for reasons of matters of public health, I will be supporting the report. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Vanderbeek. I'll assume the chair. So I think it has been duly moved and seconded, so we'll require an electronic vote on 10.3. Thank you, members. That carries 3-1. On to 10.4, 2022 review of the city's procedural bylaw. A mover, I'm having trouble with that word today, a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by myself. Any discussion on the item? Councillor Clark.
Is there a way of modifying the procedural bylaw to ensure that delegates get to the front of the line, as we heard this morning, and we've heard this many times from, it's a bit frustrating to sit through 4 or 5 hours of briefings from staff, lawyers, and then you have to go to work so you don't get to present. And we've heard this many times. Is there a way of enshrining that somehow in the procedural rules to ensure that delegates are towards the front end of the agenda?
Clerk Holland.
Through the chair, it is well within committee's decision-making to rearrange the agenda according to what is before them. Quite often, I've witnessed where we do see a lot of delegations, so we hear all the delegations first, or there are staff presentations that committee really wants to hear what staff have to say before they hear what the delegates have to say. We've been sort of caught in that trap sometimes where the delegations are speaking to committee, and committee wants to talk to staff first about what staff is going to be presenting. So it's sort of a fluid system. You do have the ability to rearrange the agenda at any time. It's well within your authority to do that. And I'll have Janet comment as well.
Janet Pilon, Deputy Clerk. If you look at Appendix B, under 511, we have changed the order of business to move the staff presentations up on the agenda under delegation requests, so that delegations are being, and they're also being separated out from the public hearings and delegations. Now they're separate. And so that delegations can be heard immediately following staff presentations, because that's where we've seen the need where the delegation wants to see the staff presentation prior to delegating. So we've actually tried to accommodate delegations towards the beginning of the agenda.
I guess in my mind, the solution would be that the presentations be put online so that everyone can see them, and then the delegate can ask their questions at the beginning of the meeting, and then you go to the presentations. It just, time and time again, we find ourselves, we didn't expect the presentation to be as long, or we didn't expect to have so many questions on the presentation, and it goes on for hours, and then the delegate has been disenfranchised because of that. It bothers me, Chair, to be honest.
Janet?
We do try to, if we're provided with this presentation well in advance, it goes on the eScribe agenda. If we get it just prior to the meeting, we upload it as soon as we get it, so the individual would have it. But usually the report is the first thing that the staff will prepare, and then they're working on the presentation just prior to the meeting. If we require some direction from council to say that staff presentations have to be, as well as the reports have to be online at a specific time within the procedural bylaw, presentations also have to be.
Okay, and the second question I have is about the treatment of delegates when they come before us. I know we put it in our roadmap, and the chair indicates that it's for questions of clarification. But time and time again, I've seen situations where the delegate ends up being grilled or debated by a member of council. And is there a way that we can enshrine that in the procedural bylaw or the code of conduct that they're really not supposed, you know, as elected members, we're not supposed to be debating members of the public. As elected members, we're supposed to be debating each other and deliberating with each other. As elected members, we hear their presentation from the delegates, and if we need a question of clarification, I was confused about this particular point, then by all means that can happen. But frequently it goes in the other direction, and then what happens, people see this and they don't want to delegate anymore because they feel like they're being abused. I'm struggling to find a solution to that.
Through the chair, that is in the procedural bylaw. I'll have Janet cite it for you, but I think this is a really good opportunity with the new council coming in and our training that we're going to be doing for chairs and co-chairs to highlight that. But I'll have Janet read what we currently have, and you can let us know if you wish to amend it.
Currently, in the procedural bylaw under 512, subsection 12, members of committees can ask questions of delegations for clarification purposes only and not for debate. And it is part of the chair's training. So, but we can enhance that training, or we can enhance this section of the procedural bylaw if there's something that you wish to add.
So the way it's written currently, if a councillor was sitting around the table and saw another councillor debating, diplomatically speaking, would it be in order then for a councillor or any councillor to call a point of order and ask the chair to, citing that policy, you have to stop this. We're supposed to ask questions of clarification only, and then they would in turn call the councillor to order.
Correct.
Okay. I didn't realize that was there, and I've seen it time and time again, and it's disheartening to see, and you can almost see the air coming out of the citizens' face when they start getting hammered with aggressive questions that are inappropriate in this setting. So I thank you for that clarification, and I think if we really remind all chairs, all members of council, this is the process, and we have to be mindful of it. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments on this report? If I could ask Councillor Vanderbeek to assume the chair for a moment, please.
Sure, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff, I just wondered if you could highlight for the public record the changes that are being proposed at this time. And I'm specifically interested whether it's a change or whether in fact it's always been there. For example, the chair and vice chair of the GIC budget, that they could be in that position for longer than a year. Maybe I missed that. Thank you.
Through the chair, so that's new, and we're recommending that really for continuity. What we're seeing is when we have a different, because the budget season is very long, sorry, Mike, it's very long, and what we're trying to do is create some continuity between those GIC budget meetings. With our discussions with finance staff and what we've observed, we think there would be a real benefit to having a chair appointed to GIC just for budget. And that chair and vice chair would be members for that year. You could change it annually if you wanted to. This is just what we're recommending. We think it'll help with the continuity of the budget season.
Thank you for confirming that. Is there anything else you think you would like to highlight for the public record of a change that, particularly one that would be noticeable by either members of council, but more importantly, the public? Through the chair.
I would highlight that we removed some of the tribunal language within the procedural bylaw. We're really trying to structure the governance committees and tribunals separately. Tribunals, so if you're talking business licensing, committee of adjustment, those sorts of bodies, which are decision-making bodies. They do not make recommendations to council. You don't see business licensing minutes and decisions coming through the council and committee session. So we've pulled those items out of the procedural bylaw. Those bodies are really governed by the SPPA and not the Municipal Act instead. The Statutory Powers Procedures Act. They're governed by that, not the Municipal Act. So we want to make sure that they're taken out of the procedural bylaw.
Thank you very much. I have a question on one of the delegates earlier this morning was making some comment on the language and the need for us to consistently move towards, to do our best to be aware of and move towards accessibility in language. I have a whole, because I'm nerdy this way, I have a whole film roll of planning boards from across the country on the language that they use. And I frankly don't find our language really accessible. And do we have on staff someone whose part of their responsibility is to, that part of accessibility is to look at our language so that we're always striving for improvement in that regard?
I'll take that one. Through the chair, Jeanette Smith, City Manager. So we don't have anyone whose particular role it is. Certainly around the AODA, we do have standards around communication. I've seen them recently. Our communications department was training staff about how to do presentations so they're accessible. In terms of readability, though, and plain language, which I'm a big supporter of. We've done some training for staff in terms of writing council reports through kind of our HR training offerings. I would say we can, I think, ramp that up and do more of that, but we don't have someone right now whose sole responsibility is to help push that agenda.
Councillor?
Thank you for that answer. I think it's really fundamental for us as a local government to ensure accessibility, both physically and otherwise. So I'll just leave that goal and objective with you. I know you share it, City Manager. To the point, the other question that was asked about the standing committee meetings and eliminating GIC. And personally, I really like the idea of that. And I know governance, good governance is a whole bunch of things. Efficiency, absolutely, because you need to be able to sustain the endurance and also the time, but also just the intersectional nature of so many of these issues which touch our city. So through the chair to the clerk, if the new council sought to restructure its committee system, through what portal and when could that be done?
Madam Clerk?
Through the chair, so that would be a direction that would be required from the new council.
Councillor?
Thank you. So further clarification, it would have to come from council as opposed to AFNA or governance.
It could come through AFNA or governance, but it's a decision of council.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I was going to ask through the chair whether there would be an opportunity. I'm assuming that for the new council, there will be an orientation session. I think I've heard it referenced this morning a few times. Is there an opportunity to, at that point, get any feedback from members of council on their thoughts on the standing committee makeup?
Madam Clerk?
Through the chair, so the orientation program that we are developing is really just a very high level of what sort of standing committee structures like subcommittees. As you know, any member of council sits on anywhere from about 25 to 35 boards and agencies. So there is a lot of overlap with our current standing and subcommittee structure with what members are also sitting in as far as ABCs within the community itself. So that sort of review would take a very long time. It's something that absolutely staff could undertake, but it's not something that would come back within a cycle or two of meetings, that's all. But our orientation is really around orientating the new members of council with what is existing.
Okay. I lied. One last question. If you could, through the chair for public record, advise how are members of standing committees chosen?
Madam Clerk?
So I wasn't here in 2018, so I'll get Janet to jump in, but they are appointed at the inaugural meeting of council. But I'll get Janet to provide further clarification.
Deputy Clerk?
Following the election, members of council-elect are provided with preference forms to be filled out, and they select which standing committees, which subcommittees, which agencies, boards, and advisory committees they'd like to sit on. And then those recommendations go to the inaugural for ratification.
Councillor?
Thank you. Through the chair, has there ever been an instance where, I know Public Works is a very popular standing committee, is there a mechanism for, say, if there's 9 spots and you get 11 interests, what happens in that regard? And that's my last question, Chair.
Yes, it is, because you're out of time. Madam Clerk?
I'll speak to when we don't have enough members as well. Okay. Standing committees, we usually have sufficient members because we have a minimum of, as far as what the membership is. So it's a minimum of 7 that we're recommending for E&CS. Most of the time we'll get 8 or 9, and then once all of the appointments are made and the councillors start attending meetings or realize that their meeting overlaps or conflicts with another meeting, then we start seeing individuals who want to be taken off certain committees or added to another committee because now they've seen, oh, that's a very interesting project that is being dealt with at that committee, and they'll ask to be put on that committee. We'll see that within the first 6 months of council. We do have subcommittees that have a required amount of members, and in some cases we'll need 7, and we'll only get 6 councillors who have shown any interest on being on those committees. We will have to, prior to the appointments of the subcommittees at the inaugural, amend the terms of reference so that now the membership on that subcommittee is 6 rather than 7.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll assume the chair. Any other first-time speakers? If not, I recognize Councillor Clark. Thank you, Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Chair. I was remiss in thanking our staff and acknowledging the overwhelming amount of work that needs to take place in order for us to review and assess our procedural bylaw. It is very complex, very complicated. If you change this clause, it affects this clause way over here, 10 pages later, and they do a remarkable job, Chair, of putting that all together and capturing all of those nuances that we need to make sure these clauses are congruent. So I do want to thank Janet and all of the team. It's I acknowledge the amount of work, and I'm glad you're there doing it for us, because if we were trying to do this as a committee, we would be here for 5 years, because it is a great deal amount of work. So thank you very much. Madam Chair, Andrea.
Thank you. So it has been moved by Councillor Pearson and seconded. Oh, I'm sorry. Clerk Holland.
Sorry, I don't want to extend the conversation too much because I know everybody wants to get to Public Works as well, who's a member there. But I do want to also absolutely acknowledge Janet, and also want to also acknowledge our legal staff who also do a thorough review of this. It is very important, because this is a bylaw, that it is legally defensible as well. So I just want to acknowledge the work that they do as well to help us prepare this document. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Holland, for that recognition, and thank you, Janet, very much. It's been duly moved and seconded, and it's on the floor. Okay, that carries 4-0. Thank you. Amendment to the outstanding business list, 13.1. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the amendment? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Clark. Thank you, that carries. There are no matters that are private or confidential on the agenda today, so we're on to the adjournment. It is moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek, that we adjourn. While we're voting on that, I would like to thank all the staff who are here assisting us today for your time and effort. Thank you very much. Thank you to Matt and Elsie McRae. That carries. Adjourned 4-0. Thank you.